It's genuinely one of the most common questions that you get from most women when they're starting an exercise program. It's a fear that they express. Yeah, I want to train, but I don't want to get too bulky. So you hear it constantly. A lot of people think, oh, it's how many calories I eat and how many calories I burn. But when they think about how many calories they burn, they forget that their body's burning calories at rest. Heart is beating, you're breathing, you're getting up to walk to the kitchen counter. When you sleep, your digestive system is working. So there's all these different things that are using calories as energy.
Welcome to Slay, the podcast where we dive into all aspects of female health, fitness, and life. I'm your host, Louise Hazel, and in today's episode, we're going to be discussing how to lift weights without getting bulky. For many women, the idea of lifting weights conjures up images of bodybuilders with massive muscles, which can be intimidating and lead to misconceptions about strength training. However, lifting weights is a critical component of any well-rounded fitness routine and offers numerous benefits beyond just building muscle. In this episode, we'll explore the science behind resistance training, what leads to muscular hypertrophy, i.e. muscle growth, and how to structure workouts to gain strength and tone without packing on excessive mass. Whether you're new to weightlifting or looking to refine your approach, this episode will provide you with the knowledge and the strategies that you need to achieve your fitness goals without the fear of becoming too bulky. Joining me today to tackle this topic is my husband, fellow trainer, Eric Strangis. Between us, we've got over 40 years of experience in the fitness industry, working directly with women, and have both competed at an extremely high level in sport. So we've literally seen it all, haven't we, Eric?
We have.
Now, obviously, you've pretty much been in the fitness industry way longer than I have at this point. So I know that, and obviously a majority of your clients are spanning so many years of being female. This is a topic that we're still tackling today, isn't it? How many times have you been asked the question, will strength training won't it just make me bulky?
It's genuinely one of the most common questions that you get from most women when they're starting an exercise program, or it's a fear that they express.
Right.
Yeah, I want to train, but I don't want to get too bulky. So you hear it constantly. And I think it's a result of a lot of different things that have kind of been pervasive in the culture for a long time. But it's something that we deal with head on day in and day out for sure.
Right. So you, as a trainer, what do you say to those clients when they ask you, will I get bulky if I lift weights? What is your initial reaction?
I usually chuckle internally. And then I ask them, is that what you're trying to do? Mm-hmm. Is that your goal? Because the answer really is probably not, especially if that's not what you're really looking to accomplish, because there's so many things that go into it that need to be in place in order for you to actually grow the size of the muscle, especially for women when their hormones are a certain way and there's all these other factors that contribute to these things.
Let's talk about those factors.
Yeah.
So, let's give us a list, not exhaustive list, but, if people that are listening, what do they need to know? What are the factors that are going to affect one's ability of gaining significant muscle size? What are the limitations?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the factors that contribute to gaining muscle size, what we call hypertrophy, which is just the scientific name of it, there's the obvious one is training, right? What are you actually doing when you're training and you're lifting weights? How many sets are you doing? How many reps are you doing? How much rest time are you taking? What exercises are you choosing? But I think there's other factors as well that people don't always consider when they think about, oh yeah, this is going to help me get bigger, or this is going to cause me to get bulky. And a major one is sleep, right? If your sleep isn't dialed in and your recovery is not dialed in, it's going to be really hard for you to gain muscle size. Another obvious one is nutrition, right? If you're not eating in a calorie surplus, meaning that you're eating more calories on average than you're burning over the course of a day and a week, going to be hard for you to gain muscle size. Mm-hmm. If you are not getting enough protein in your diet, right? Again, that's a huge building block for you to actually build muscle. So that's going to be really challenging for you to get bulky and put on muscle size. And I think it's a lot harder for people to gain muscle and gain actual cross-sectional area of the muscle than it is for people to train without developing muscle, right? Because of all the other factors that go into it. And obviously there's other things that come into play for a female population, specifically like their hormones, right? And that has a huge contributing factor into how someone's going to respond to a stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And the stimulus that we're talking about in this instance is lifting weights, and lifting weights a very specific way.
So break it down for us. You mentioned obviously muscular hypertrophy, the scientific name for building muscle. What is that exactly? To those at home that are new to, resistance training, maybe thinking about resistance training, may have inadvertently done some in the past, then felt like they were, getting bigger and then just ran away from it. Talk to us about muscle hypertrophy and what that is.
Yeah, so hypertrophy just means growing the size of the muscle. And when we think about that in a little bit more of a technical way, we're actually talking about the cross-sectional area of the muscle. And so, a great way of thinking about it is if you've heard people say muscle weighs more than fat. Well, it really doesn't. A pound is a pound. What they're saying is if you look at a pound of fat on a table, the cross-sectional area or the volume that pound of fat takes up is quite sizable. But if you put a pound of muscle on a table, the cross-sectional area or the volume of that muscle is actually a lot smaller than 1 pound of fat if they were next to each other. And so when we talk about hypertrophy, we're actually talking about growing the area of that muscle. And so depending upon how you train, you can actually influence how that muscle looks. So bodybuilding is a great example of this. Bodybuilders aren't always the strongest people in the room, even though their muscle size is the biggest, right? A power lifter, on the other hand, if you've ever seen like a powerlifting competition, they do 3 big lifts. They do a big back squat, they do a big deadlift, and they do a big bench press. And the goal for them is to move as much weight as they possibly can. They want to have the highest load on that bar. And those guys look like a lot of times like big barrel sized dudes who look like they're out in like the backyard chopping down wood all day. So they wouldn't look like someone who is big and muscular and ripped and defined, but they're actually the strongest. And that's because their training styles are so different.
Got you. I've got to get this flying. Sorry.
keep that in here. This is great.
Did I get it?
I don't know if you did, but if it comes back, we got to.
Okay, got you. So we're talking about cross-sectional size of muscle and muscular hypertrophy.
Did you hear anything I said, or was the fly bothering you?
Both. For most people at home are not going to know the difference between a bodybuilder and a power lifter, right? Sure. So, all I think majority of women are looking at is size, right? They're looking at that overall aesthetic. So, a power lifter, like you said, might be extremely large, quite
lumberjack.
Barreled. Right. The difference when we're speaking about bodybuilders, they're the type of people who you see are extremely cut and extremely lean. Powerlifters tend not to be so lean because obviously, we talked about their main priority is muscular strength, whereas bodybuilding is an aesthetic sport.
And I think that's actually one of the biggest misconceptions that women have is they don't understand that there's a difference between training for strength and training for hypertrophy and training for power.
Yeah.
Right.
Or training for aesthetics.
Yeah. Or training for aesthetics. Right. Yeah. Which sometimes could, depending upon your, physical makeup, could mean training in one or all 3 of those in different kind of, with a different amount of each.
Absolutely. In order to bring about your desired goal or result, which is, we'll come to a little bit more of that nuance. I think that's a really good topic to kind of touch upon. How do we change our potential body composition or body aesthetics, and the types of training that we need in order to do that.
Sure.
So going back to muscular hypertrophy then, how many reps and sets would I typically need to be performing in order to gain that significant muscle mass or muscle size?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different research that's out there. The most common thing that you'll hear is usually anywhere between 10 to 20 sets per week of a muscle that you're trying to grow will generally stimulate hypertrophy, but there's a lot of caveats to that, right? So when you think about how frequently you're training, usually those 10 to 20 sets could come over between 1 to 3 sessions in a week. Most people will train a specific muscle they're trying to grow twice a week. usually with around 48 to 72 hours of rest between those sessions. But how you do those sets matters. It's not just like, oh yeah, let me do 10 easy sets and that's going to help me get bigger.
Because most people at home are not thinking about, oh, I'm going to do 20 sets of an exercise. They're thinking about reps and sets in a session.
Yeah.
So what would that break down to? Let's say I'm going to squat this week. What kind of rep range would I be looking at in order to induce muscular size?
Yeah, so let's say you had a goal of growing the size of your quads, your thighs, right? So your legs. You might do, I don't know, 4 sets of 8 back squats, right? And in that same workout, you might do another 4 sets of leg press. And then you might do another 3 to 4 sets of leg extension, right? Where you're using a machine to really target that muscle. And so that, over the course of that specific workout, would put you around 12 sets of work for your quads, both directly with like a leg extension or indirectly like a squat.
Got you. And now let's talk about load. Like, what type of load would I need to be lifting in order to gain that, significant size? Like, what are we talking about here? Because I feel like people they want you to pin it right down to a specific number, but it's not as easy as that, is it?
Yeah. So let's take those 4 sets as an example. So if you were doing 4 sets of back squat, usually for hypertrophy, you're looking at somewhere between 6 reps and 12 reps. Although, the research says you can sometimes go up to 30 reps. The real goal for you is to take it fairly close to muscular failure on every single set that you're doing if your goal is to gain muscle size.
What does that mean to me, a person who, let's say, is untrained? What does that feel like? What does it look like, muscular failure?
Yeah, so muscular failure feels like you're having a burning sensation, right? It feels like you're trying to perform the rep, but you're trying to kind of squirm and worm your way out of it to use other muscles to help you perform that movement or complete that movement. And it means that when you try to do another rep, you physically can't do it, right? That's what muscular failure actually looks and feels like. And there's different exercises that actually will be more beneficial for you if your goal was to get bulky, or in this case, if your goal is to prevent yourself from getting bulky.
So let's say, and going back to the whole getting bulky of it, what type of rest would I be taking if I was like aiming to, build muscle size? Like, what kind of rest would my muscles need in between those sets?
Yeah, usually anywhere between 90 seconds and 2 minutes, sometimes up to 3 to 5 minutes. If you're moving a lot of weight because you have a lot of strength as well, and you're taking those sets really close to failure, some people who are really well trained might be taking anywhere between 8 to 12 minutes of rest between exercise or between sets on big moves like a squat. For someone who's beginning, somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes is usually that range. And if you don't need that 2 to 3 minutes rest, it probably means that you're not working close enough to muscular failure to induce a response that's going to grow muscle size.
Got you. So how many days a week, are typically people who are getting big, bulky, lots of muscle size, people that are hypertrophy training? How many days a week are they typically lifting weights?
How many days per week are they lifting? It really could be anywhere between 4 to 6, right? Depending upon someone's program. Some people can get away with 2 to 3 workouts in a week. But really, again, if you're trying to grow muscle size, it depends on the target tissue that you're working or the target muscle. So the number of sets for that specific muscle matters. And usually you're going to train that muscle twice a week on average, anywhere between 1 to 3 times. But most people, if they're training that muscle twice per week and they're taking their, over the course of those 2 sessions, they're getting between 10 to 20 sets, they can usually get some sort of hypertrophy response if the other things are considered.
Now, when we're talking about specifically targeting that muscle, what can we be doing in order to facilitate more muscle growth? What kind of stress can we be putting on that muscle?
Yeah, so you want exercises that allow you to have a full range of motion, right? So you want things where you can go all the way up and all the way down. Generally, if your goal is to gain muscle size, you want exercises that have a lot of stability built into them. And so that allows you to actually target the muscle that you're trying to work more specifically and isolate it a little bit better. So an example, again, is going back to your idea of trying to grow the size of your legs, right? If you wanted to do that, yes, a squat is a great exercise because you can go through a full range of motion, but the thing that usually fails first isn't your legs. It's usually your core stability or your low back or your upper back strength. Well, if you're failing in those things, you haven't really reached failure for your legs. So something that would provide more stability as an exercise might be something like a leg press, where you're seated on a bench, right? You have back support and you're only working your lower half. And that would provide more stability. And the thing that's going to reach failure in that example would probably be your legs, right? Something that has even more stability than that would be like a machine leg extension, where you're seated on a bench. There's a support on top of your legs pushing down to keep the upper thigh stable. And now you're simply straightening your knee and then bending your knee. And now you're really isolating that target muscle that you're trying to grow, which is the quadricep or the front of the thigh. And that might be even a better exercise choice for you if your goal was to grow that muscle.
Okay, now let's dial it all back. Let's answer the original question. So if I'm a person who wants to avoid getting bulky, but I still want to get stronger, then how can I, improve my strength without getting big? Like, what rep ranges in that instance should I be doing?
Yeah, I think if you're talking specifically about rep ranges, you can focus on the lower or higher end of that spectrum. So you can be doing what we would consider to be really strength focused work, which is anywhere between 1 to 5 repetitions of an exercise. And when you're doing those 1 to 5 repetitions, if you wanted to focus on gaining strength, you would be going pretty heavy on those exercises. If you wanted to be focused on power, you might be going to maybe only 50 to 60% of your maximum weight, but you'd be doing that exercise with a certain amount of speed, right? And you'd be doing that with a lot of velocity. And then the other end of the spectrum, so outside the hypertrophy zone, would be things over 12 reps. So you might be doing 2 to 3 sets of 15 reps, or you might be doing 2 sets of 20 repetitions. And there you're going to get a little bit more muscular endurance versus something that would grow the size of the muscle.
Okay, so we've mentioned at one end of the spectrum, we've got muscular strength and also power. And then the other end of the spectrum, we've got this muscular endurance. Now, what load would I be looking at if I were entering into, let's say, start with muscular endurance?
Yeah. So if you were trying to avoid getting big and bulky, but you still wanted to build your muscular endurance and gain a little bit of strength endurance, what we would consider that to be, the load that you're going to be using is somewhere around usually 50 to 70% of your 1 rep maximum. So if you could squat 400 pounds one time, right, you'd take 50 to 70% of that and you'd aim for about 15 reps, something around that zone. And again, percentages are really variable. What that feels like is still feels like you're getting fairly close to failure when you're hitting your targeted rep range. So if your goal is to get 15 reps, you still want to feel like around 13, 14, 15, it's challenging for you to complete that exercise.
Now let's take it all the way to the strength power kind of end. What type of loads would I be looking at there? Like, how much load compared to my 1 rep max would I be looking to achieve per rep?
If you're looking at power,
let's say strength.
Yeah, so if you're looking at strength, you're usually looking at 85% or more of your 1 rep maximum. And for those who haven't ever done a 1 rep maximum test, basically that means you have one opportunity to lift the heaviest weight that you possibly can, right? What is that number, right? So if you take about 85% or more of that for 1 to 5 reps, you're usually working in a pure strength zone where you're going to develop muscular strength, which a lot of times is developed and it comes from your nervous system, right? Adapting to the feeling of that load as much as your muscles, but it prevents you from necessarily gaining muscular size, right? So you have a strength adaptation without necessarily the size adaptation that comes with it.
And then you talked about lifting at speed, so power training. Typically in track and field, we would often aim for around about 40 odd % of our 1 rep max.
Yeah.
And if I think back to like my most powerful lifting sessions, they were not particularly heavy. They would involve like jump squats.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd still have a barbell on my back, but my aim was to shift that barbell of, let's say, around about 40 kilos, because let's say my 1 rep max was 100 kilos at that time, but as fast as freaking possible.
Yeah.
And, you know, as let's say high jumpers, long jumpers, speed. You don't want to be overly bulky. You don't want to carry a ton of muscle size.
Yeah.
What you want is for those muscles to be able to react.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to create an extreme amount of explosive power.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, I geek out on track and field training. For everyone listening, I think track and field strength and conditioning programs are the absolute pinnacle of human performance. Like when you think about training at the highest level, honestly, track and field has it down better than I think any other sport, better than football, better than basketball, better than what you call football, which is soccer, better than all those things.
What makes them so good?
Well, first they understand how to develop speed and power, right? And their goal in sport is to either get faster, throw something further, jump higher, jump longer, get over a bar.
Right?
It's real athleticism, where sometimes I think, you know, other sports chase numbers in the weight room, but they don't really know how that improves someone's performance on the field or on the pitch or on the court. And so track and field just has it down. The other thing that track and field has to do, which you know a lot about, like you just mentioned, is you have to get someone stronger, faster, more powerful without putting on a ton of extra mass, right? Especially if they're a sprinter.
Want a ton of extra mass?
Because obviously that's going to, you know, hinder how fast they can run or how quickly they can move if they're carrying more weight on their frame. Right. And so there's obviously a delicate balance between having enough mass to generate force, right? But you also have to be able to move quickly over time. So there's, you know, my college strength and conditioning coach told me once, there's never a problem with you being stronger and lighter, right? If you're getting stronger and you're getting lighter, I'm never going to be mad at you, right? Because we used to have to weigh in every day. He's like, as long as your numbers in here are going up and you feel good on the court, I never have a problem with you getting lighter if you're getting stronger, right? And so those things are really, really interesting, I think. But track and field has it down. You know, I think better than any sport.
You know, the really interesting thing, if we look at like even the Olympics, what I think we saw at this recent Olympic Games was the rise of like the crossover athlete. So I think especially in those sprint events, for those of you at home that are interested, we saw like 200 meter specialists excelling in the 100 meters because of the like specificity and the benefits of their speed endurance. So where you have like the 100 meter specialist, pure speed, that crossover is actually now benefiting certain athletes and making those guys world champions. And the 200 meter runners are now kind of like, you know, excellent 400 meter runners.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is not just a broad spectrum of athleticism at the very top of the chain, but I think now we should be looking at a broad range of athleticism for, you know, Joe Bloggs, you know, or Jane Doe, who's in the gym wanting to improve her overall fitness. Why shouldn't we be applying those principles to the everyday athlete or weekend warrior?
Yeah. And I honestly, on that question, I think one of the issues is we lack specificity in the real world, right? They're training for a specific event. So everything that they do goes into getting better at that specific thing, where what we do for all of us, myself included right now, because I don't have a sport, is I have a very general strength and conditioning program, right? There's nothing specific that I'm training for. And so if you do that for too long, I think you can get a little bit lost, right? On where you're taking someone in their training program, or for myself, for instance, where I'm going with my training program, what am I training for? And so you never actually progressively overload. And that's something that we haven't talked about yet in regards to hypertrophy that we should probably touch on too.
So if I'm a person who wants to improve their strength without getting bulky, what type of rest should I be taking in between sets?
Yeah, so if you're working on that low end, the 1 to 5 rep range focused on strength or focused on power, you're going to be taking longer rests. You're probably going to be taking rests anywhere between 3 minutes and 5 minutes. If you're working on the higher end of that spectrum where you're doing more strength endurance work, so you're doing 15 reps to 20 reps, maybe even 25 reps, you're actually going to be taking shorter rest because you're focused on endurance. So what you're going to be doing is usually somewhere between 30 seconds to 1 minute rest between sets.
Got you. Now, how frequently would I be training as a person who doesn't want to get bulky, as a person who does want to perhaps improve their strength, but just doesn't want to overdo it in terms of size?
Yeah, again, anywhere between 1 to 3 times per week on those movements. The good thing about some of that stuff is you can be a little bit more global in your exercise selection. So you're probably going to be doing more compound lifts, or you're like a squat, like a deadlift. Maybe even for power, some Olympic lifting, like something called a snatch or a clean. And then if you're working on the endurance side, you might be doing more complex movements, meaning that there's multiple parts to the movement. So think about combining two actions. Think about doing a step up onto a box and then doing an overhead press or something over your head. That's a very complex movement. And that might be something that you add in on some of those muscle endurance phases. It doesn't allow you to use as much weight, but that's not your goal, right? Your goal is to be moving for a significant amount of time to develop endurance in the global system.
And potentially functionality, right?
100%.
Talk to me about speed. Like, what pace am I shifting at? Like, am I lifting slow? Am I taking my time? Like, bear in mind, I don't want to get too big.
Yes. So velocity of the lift is a huge thing that really good strength coaches look at. Again, let's start at the beginning. So if you're trying to develop power, maybe you're doing anywhere between 1 to 5 reps at 40% of your load, which is very light. You're moving that thing quick. Bar speed is huge, right? The velocity that you're moving at is extremely important, right? Let's think about strength now, which again is also between 1 to 5 reps, right? So same rep range, but the load you're using is way different. You're using 85% or more, sometimes 90, 95% of your 1 rep maximum. So it's really heavy. That's what we would call explosive slow. So you're still trying to push that thing as fast as you possibly can, but one single rep might take you 5-10 seconds, maybe even more, to complete and squeeze and grind it out. And so that's what we would think of as like a really grind lift, which is really interesting. So the movement is going to be a lot slower. When you're thinking about hypertrophy or trying to gain muscle size, that's where we think about moderate, right? The tempo is usually moderate in nature. It's going to be moderate on the way down on the movement. It's going to be moderate on the way up. And what we're trying to do with that is keep control and stability so that we can put a ton of tension into the muscle that we're trying to target. We need to have tension in the targeted tissue if you want to grow that muscle. And then if you think about the high end, again, that's going to be somewhere usually a little bit slower when you're thinking about muscle endurance, right? Because you're trying to keep the muscle under tension and the body under tension for an extended amount of time. And so the movement itself might be a little bit slower if you're doing 15 to 20 reps.
Now let's touch upon, one of the key components that we know as trainers is absolutely crucial to any sort of muscular adaptation and progression, which is progressive overload. What factor, first of all, explain to those at home who might not know what that is.
So progressive overload simply means that over an extended period of time, you are either going to increase the amount of weight that you're lifting, the number of reps that you're doing with a given weight, or the number of sets that you're going to be doing at a given weight. That's the easiest way to think about it. And so you do that gradually. So if you start on day 1 at 20 pounds, you might finish 2 months later using 27 pounds, right? Or if you started with 1 set, by the end of that training block or 3-month period, you might be doing that same weight with 5 sets, right? And so that's just simply, you need to constantly be giving increased stimulus to your system to keep creating adaptations. And for people, specifically women, what you see a lot of times is that they've been doing the same workout with the same weights, with the same exercises, same number of sets, same number of reps for years even.
That's called Pilates, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of time. And a lot of times that's also what we call exercise.
Yeah.
So, I love group fitness because I think it's a fun way to get together with people and move your body. But most group fitness programs are not training because there's no progressive overload built into the system. There's variety. It's fun, right? It's a great way to move, but it doesn't necessarily keep increasing the stimulus that you're getting on your body to create an adaptation that you're looking for. And that's where people can work really, really hard at something, but they're not necessarily seeing the results that they're looking for.
So as a woman who, again, doesn't want to get big, why should I? What are the benefits of progressive overload to me?
Yeah, you need to be tracking something to create a disruption in your body that your body thinks, hey, this is something that I want to respond to. And that disruption and adaptation that you're subsequently looking for could be strength, could be power, could be weight loss, could be speed, could be endurance, could be your ability to walk up and down stairs, right? Could be your ability to keep your heart rate down when you're doing some sort of extended exercise like running around the reservoir, right? There's a million different adaptations that you could be looking for, but if you want to make progress, you have to progressively overload your system in a way that's going to lead to the adaptation that you're looking for.
I love that. What are the other factors that I need to consider? Perhaps let's talk about nutrition, for example. You know, if I am in a calorie surplus, i.e. I have an excess of calories at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about energy balance, i.e. calories in versus calories out, and I'm resistance training, what can I expect to happen to my body? Like, what's going to happen when it comes to my nutrition?
Yeah, if you're in a calorie surplus, you can expect that some sort of weight gain is likely going to happen, whether that's muscle mass, whether that's fat mass, something along that end of the scale is going to tip. If you're training hard and you're training appropriately and you're getting the right amount of protein in, and you're in a specific, you know, you're not consuming so many calories that you're also adding fat mass, then hopefully if your training's in line, you can gain muscle mass, right? And the opposite end is true when you're looking to lose body fat. A lot of times your training might not change that much. The thing that's going to change is probably going to be your nutrition. If you're trying to lean out, you might be doing really similar training, right, in the gym, but you're just going to be consuming slightly less calories, so you're in a little bit of a calorie deficit over the course of the day and the week.
So this is probably one of the biggest things that I don't think women really know about when it comes to bulking, when it comes to their overall goals, because the majority of women that come to us, obviously, a lot of the time have fat loss goals. The thing that I don't think that they dial in and spend enough time and effort on is the nutrition. And so, you know, I can have girls in the gym lifting personal bests or, you know, just lifting more weight than they've ever lifted before, getting stronger. But the key to, and also with that same mentality, oh, I don't want to get super big. Great. You know, if you don't want to get super big, one way to mitigate against getting super big and bulky is to simply eat in a slight calorie deficit. Now, that calorie deficit could be really minimal. It could be 50 calories. You know, could be 500 calories, depending on your goal, which I don't recommend you do. It's going to make your sessions way, way harder. But, you know, if that's a short-term goal, not a problem. So, but I think that the understanding of what it means to be in a calorie deficit, and more importantly, the application of that is something that we women could really be dialing into way, way more. And I think it's the untapped energy that really gives us the results that we're looking for when we want to feel stronger, but also appear leaner and not, you know, gain a ton of size, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And I think one thing that a lot of times from a nutrition standpoint, a lot of people think, oh, it's how many calories I eat and how many calories I burn. Those are the things that are going to make sense. But when they think about how many calories they burn, they forget that their body's burning calories at rest, right? Your vital organs are working, right? Your brain is working, your heart is beating, you're breathing, you're getting up to walk to the kitchen counter, right? Even when you sleep, your digestive system is working. So there's all these different things that are using calories as energy. And so people think, oh, if I want to be in a calorie deficit, I have to burn 3,000 calories a day in order to be in a calorie deficit. And it's like, well, you are burning calories just by existing too. And so finding your basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories you're burning when you're not doing any exercise at all, is a great starting point to then figure out, okay, what do I actually need to do to be in a calorie deficit? Because you might already be starting at a spot that's, pretty good, right?
Now, if I'm a person that wants to increase my muscle tone and not size, therefore, what type of things would you advise? Now, this is a really interesting thing because I can remember a client saying to me, how do I get rid of this cellulite, or how do I tone my butt and stuff like that? Yeah. And so a lot of the time, our actual goals, I want to increase my butt, but I don't want to, a client actually came to me recently, was taking Ozempic, but wanted to booty gains and wanted to increase their butt and thighs and get thicker. Yeah. So, when our actual actions are at odds with our goals, what advice do you have for people then?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to prioritize what's the most important thing for you, and make progress in that direction, right? So if your goal is to increase the size of your booty, right, then you're going to want to do things that lead to that. So you're going to want to do hypertrophy training for your butt. You might going to be doing some deadlifts. You might do some squats. You might do some leg press. You might do some hamstring curls. You might do some glute bridges. You might do things that put a ton of tension on that targeted tissue. And then you would probably want to get your nutrition and sleep dialed in to assist with those things. But I think what you're talking about is having conflicting goals. Right. And I think a lot of us have conflicting goals. It's like, yeah, I want to look big and strong, but I also want to be super lean and have really defined abs. And it's like, well, you might kind of want to go through seasons of prioritizing one of those things so that you can maybe gain a little bit of muscle mass and then maybe lose a little bit of excess body fat and start to lean out a little bit. I think that the average person, though, especially if they're not training at all, usually they're going to see pretty good results if they get on a training regimen and they just train pretty consistently and eat without being a jerk. If you don't be an asshole. I'm an asshole sometimes. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have 4 chocolate chip cookies from Levon Bakery.
And then you'll have my chocolate chip cookies as well.
Well, that's because you ate my ice cream cone. So it's like you start to be a jerk, right? You start to be like, oh yeah, I can train and do all this and I'll be fine. And it's like, well, you kind of know. So if you have, pretty dialed in stuff and you train and you haven't been working out at all, usually you can start to see some initial gains just because you're getting more active. And I think that's really, really great.
I feel like this is actually a kind of typical situation that I hear with women that have started, and their entry point to fitness was Pilates. And so, and this I often can feel can be a little bit of a red herring. So if you think about an untrained individual, right, you take someone who hasn't done any exercise or is returning from a break, and they go to a methodology like Pilates where you're training in a muscular endurance, training zone. Yeah. What can those people expect by way of results? When might those results plateau, and where do they go from there? If they feel like they're no longer seeing any changes in their body, but they still want to get stronger and they still want to, feel good, look good, where do they go?
Yeah, it sounds crazy. And I want this to be taken with a grain of salt, but the answer is the word more. They need to be doing more of something. And when I say more, I don't mean more necessarily work. It goes back to that progressive overload. Maybe you need to be using more load because you're no longer getting the stimulus that's going to help you continue to make progress, right? If you're still using the same amount of weight that you were last year, you might need to use more load, right? Or it might be more reps, or it might be more sets, or you might need more sleep, or you might need more calories, right? Or more protein. And so that really is the name of the game, is doing more. But again, take that with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean train 3 times a day. It means the training that you're doing might need more intention.
Yes. So I think when we think of more, we automatically go to more volume. And so I think the next phase for most women who perhaps aren't necessarily seeing results or have hit a plateau, especially with modalities like Pilates, is to go from 2 days a week to 3 days a week. Sure. To go from 3 days a week to 5 days a week. To go from 5 days a week to 6 days a week. And before you know it, that body's, feeling burnt out. You're feeling a little bit less strong, perhaps even weaker. And I've seen this myself with clients who are overtraining. And just because you're performing muscular endurance, low load, high repetition, there is a lot of volume in modalities like Pilates that I don't think a lot of women understand they need adequate amounts of rest for. We've seen it a lot, haven't we, in the gym?
I love that you comment on this, because we talked about the amount of rest that someone should be taking in a singular workout, but it also matters how much rest they're taking between workouts. And going back to track and field has this down, right? In track and field, it's very common to have this idea of high-low training is what they call it. So you have a really high intense day that's really demanding on your nervous system. There's a ton of output. And then the next day is really low. You still might be moving, you still might be doing things for exercise, but the type of exercise that you're doing are really easy on your nervous system. They encourage blood flow, right? And they actually help you recover better. And then you come back the next day and you have another high day. And so that high-low training is really, really there. And I think the idea of training hard every single day, or training the same muscle groups or the same way every single day, is going to lead to overtraining. And there is science behind this. Like, supercompensation is the idea that your performance will suffer if you're training too frequently. Your performance will also suffer if you're not training frequently enough. And so usually 48 to 72 hours between training sessions that are super intense, or between hitting muscle groups in a very intense way, is usually the best way to continue to make progress.
Now, let's say I don't want big arms. Should I just only train legs?
No.
Why would you say that? What would you be saying if I came in and I'm a client and I'm like, yo, I don't want, I just don't feel comfortable. Like, I feel self-conscious about perhaps having big arms or whatever. Yeah. Can we just do leg work?
And is your goal to grow the size of your legs?
Well, and this is often what I hear from most women, is it's like, I don't really want to do, but I do want to get rid of this. I do want to get rid of this wobble. But I don't want to train arms.
Yeah. Well, those two things are at odds with one another, right? Wanting to get rid of the quote unquote wobble in the arm, but not train the arm. Those two things are at odds. I would also say that your body is a really smart system. And so if we talk about trying to train the lower body, there are really great movements for your lower body that involve your upper body, right? With things like grip strength. And so if you're constantly failing because your upper body is weak, it will actually limit and hinder your ability to train your legs the way that you want to train your legs. So let's just assume that I'm going to agree with you and say, yeah, forget about your upper body. Let's just do stuff that's going to help your leg work. You're still going to be limited by your upper body when we do your leg work. And so we have to do things that are going to help you with that. So even if I just accepted that person's thought process, they would still be wrong. And I'd still want them to train their upper body. But I think, there's so many global movements that are beneficial for someone's health, their fitness, their goals, that, thinking about exercise in totality is really, really important.
Now, let's talk about the benefits of strength training beyond aesthetics. Give me a couple of examples of why, if I'm not already strength training, I should definitely be lifting weights.
You reach a certain point in your life where your muscle mass starts to decrease every decade, right? And so if you want to continue to be strong and healthy as you age, that's really, really important.
So how old do if I should have started by now if I'm 20, what's the deal?
100%. Yeah. I think most people, the average person is at the most amount of muscle mass that they'll ever have, usually around age 30. And I believe muscle mass decreases after age 40 for most people. And so, if you think about trying to build an engine for yourself that's going to last the rest of your life, that's really where it starts, is in those younger years. And I think if you're older and you haven't started training yet, that you're not hopeless, right? No. Now is the time to start. And again, think about progressive overload. Start where you are. You don't have to start somewhere way down the path. If getting up and down out of your chair is challenging right now, start there. And then you can progressively add additional weights or additional reps, right? And so thinking about training, don't think about lifespan, think about health span in regards to just how it impacts your overall health. Meaning, you want to be as healthy as you can be for as long as you possibly can be. You don't want to be 50 and ill. You don't want to be 60 and not able to go, do something on that trip that you've been dreaming of taking your entire life, and you're finally on it, but you're not well enough or mobile enough to take that walk, right? And so think about your health span as much as your lifespan when you think about how training can impact you outside of aesthetics and how it can benefit your entire life.
Give me another benefit of strength training.
Another benefit of strength training is that if your wife's trying to race you, you cannot pull a hamstring, because I've done that before. So that's one benefit. But I think at Slay, we talk about this all the time. Think about what your body can do versus what your body looks like. And I think continuing to, do things that you've never been able to do before is a life skill that I think translates into all other areas of
confidence.
Your existence. Yeah.
I was just actually on Instagram today, and I saw one of my friends back home, makeup artist Kerry. She's had an amazing amazing fitness journey in her 50s. And I can remember we were doing my makeup for a shoot for London 2012 Olympics, and we're now like over a decade on. And, just watching her journey of changing her lifestyle habits, hitting the gym, lifting weights, her, aesthetics, her almost definitely changed. She's looking in incredible shape. She posted a great transformation pic. But the thing that has really shone out to me the most is her level of confidence and the way in which she's now sharing the benefits of like her mental health, like improved mood. And, she posts these videos of her like roller skating and stuff like that. So we're not just talking about how strength applies to the gym or you getting in and up out your chair. How does it bring more functionality, more joy, and more activity to your overall everyday life? What are the activities that you can continue to do in your 50s that if we're talking to your 20-year-old self, you might have thought that my 50-year-old self never going to be roller skating, and watching her post these videos is literally the highlights of my week. I'm not saying she always stands up and doesn't fall over, but watching the joy of her being able to pick up a new skill, tap into a skill that she's had before, to me is just such a joyful moment, and something I'm extremely proud of for her. So, again, we talk about that like mental health aspect, but that functional strength, can bring so many more benefits as well.
So much quality of life that comes with that. I think about our clients who are in their 40s or 50s, but they're going out on weeknights and they're going dancing for 3 or 4 hours and then coming in the next day to train. And I'm like, how? I can't do that, know? And so there's so many different benefits that come with it, not just strength training, but even the conditioning side too, and everything that can do for the quality of your life.
Eric, the game is called Go Big or Go Home. So I've got 10 quick fire questions for you. I say questions, they're topics. Now, you have to decide, go big, I'm going to double down on this particular modality, food, whatever it be, or I'm going to leave it alone. Like if I'm thinking about my longevity, I'm thinking about health span, then I'm like double down or like, no, I'm good.
Yep.
Number 1. And don't think too much about this, Eric.
Yeah.
Quick fire. Unless it requires more discussion.
Okay.
Protein.
Go big.
Compound exercises.
Go big, big.
HIIT training.
Go big.
Resistance bands.
Go home because they belong in the home.
Nice.
They're great for travel.
Cool.
Yeah.
Pilates.
Go home. Because I think that it's the marketing around it has made it something it's not.
Okay, love that. We'll dive into that another day. Bicep curls.
Go big.
Always. Pre-workout.
Go home.
Creatine monohydrate.
Ooh. Go big.
Group fitness.
Go big. It's fun.
Weightlifting belts.
Go home.
Excellent. I love that. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that really gives a little bit of clarity to a lot of those listeners at home who are in that in-between space as to, should I try lifting weights should I remain in this kind of like fearful place? Hopefully it kind of puts people's minds at ease. And obviously if they have any questions, they can always, slide in our DMs. We'll point them in the right direction, won't we?
We will.
We promise to, don't we?
Absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you. So in summary, lifting weights doesn't have to mean bulking up. By understanding the principles of resistance training and adjusting your approach, you can build strength, improve your health, and tone your muscles without adding excessive mass. Now, remember, the benefits of strength training extend far beyond aesthetics, contributing to your overall well-being, longevity, and quality of life. Now, that concludes this episode of Slay. Stay tuned for more empowering discussions on female health, fitness, and life. You can follow me at Louise Hazel on social media, and you can follow Eric at Eric Strangis. Check out the Slay brand now at Slay Athletic, and don't forget to subscribe to the Slay podcast if you haven't done so already on YouTube, and leave us a comment. You can also get fit at home using the Slay app. You can download that now for free from the App Store and join our online community.